Hello there, it's Richard here. This is our second episode on potable water. So if you haven't seen the first one, then I recommend you go and take a look at that first. So there are many different methods of producing potable water, and which method is chosen depends on what water is available and the local conditions. So in the UK, levels of rainfall are quite high, and the rainwater is a type of fresh water. That means it contains low concentrations of dissolved substances. Now, step one in potable water production in the UK is the collection of fresh water from a suitable water source, and that's one that's not too heavily in a too heavily polluted area. And then once you've done that, the water is put through a two-step treatment process. Firstly, it's filtered, so it's passed through a wire mesh of solid to remove solid particles. And secondly, it's sterilised using chlorine gas to kill harmful microorganisms in the water. And the processes involved in treating rainwater, just to remind you, are filtration first and then sterilisation following that. Now, in Saudi Arabia, they have to use a different method for getting potable water. But luckily, there are many different methods of producing potable water. So the method they use in Saudi Arabia is different because the conditions are very different there to what they are in the UK. So rainfall levels are very low in Saudi Arabia, so fresh water supply cannot be relied upon. Seawater is used as an alternative to fresh water. Now, seawater must be desalinated, and that just means have the salt removed to make it potable. And there are two desalination methods. Firstly, distillation, that is boiling seawater to create steam, which is then condensed to give pure water. And secondly, you've got a process called reverse osmosis, and that's when seawater is passed through a selective membrane that only allows water molecules through, so that separates the water and the salt. Now, the major disadvantage of both desalination methods is that they need a high amount of energy, and that makes them very expensive. So using fresh water is preferable where possible. So for treating seawater, you have reverse osmosis, which is when seawater is passed through a selective membrane that only allows the passage of water molecules. You have desalination, which is removing salt from seawater. And you have distillation, which is boiling seawater to give steam, which then condenses to give pure water. And when we're thinking about the different ways in which you produce potable water, so in the UK, you normally take that straight from fresh water, which just needs filtration through a wire mesh and sterilisation using chlorine gas. And in Saudi Arabia, they use seawater as their source of water, and they use distillation or reverse osmosis as their desalination method. So rainwater is a type of fresh water, meaning that it contains low levels of dissolved substances. And the methods for desalinating seawater are reverse osmosis. Remember, that's where you put it through a partially permeable membrane, which only allows water through it. And you've also got distillation, which is where you evaporate seawater and then condense it to give you pure water. And the process of water production in the UK is firstly, water is collected from a suitable source, and that's one that's just not in a too heavily polluted area. Water is then passed through a wire mesh to filter out solid particles, and the water is sterilised by adding chlorine gas, which kills harmful bacteria. But in Saudi Arabia, potable water is produced by desalinating seawater.